All right, hi 7th grade. Today we are going to learn about trophic pyramids. Yesterday you learned a ton of vocabulary about producers, consumers, autotrophers, heterotroph, the types of consumers. And now we're going to apply that to how energy flows and the amount of energy that flows through an ecosystem. And that's kind of what trophic means, and pyramid is how we're going to organize that information. So I'm going to draw a pyramid, and you should draw this in your notes as well. Okay, so pyramid just is the shape of how we're going to organize it, kind of like a food pyramid, but this is more for the entire ecosystem rather than for a human. And all energy, like we learned yesterday, starts with the sun. Because the sun is not an organism, I'm not going to put it within the pyramid, but I'm going to put it here down at the bottom because that's kind of where the energy starts. So plants can photosynthesize, so they get their energy directly from the sun, whereas anything that consumes plants gets that energy indirectly. So this first level of the pyramid is going to be our producers. Remember yesterday we learned producers are those that can make their own food, typically plants. So flowers are a producer. Apple trees are a producer. Grass, ferns, any fruit or vegetable, all of those things are producers. They're plants. They get 100% of their energy from the sun. And they get it directly because they are able to photosynthesize. They're able to do that chemical reaction that uses water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight to produce sugar and oxygen. And that sugar is what they use for food to grow. Next, we have our organisms that eat plants. Yesterday you learned that those are called herbivores. Today we're going to give them another name. They are primary consumers. Primary means first. So remember, a consumer is anything that has to eat another organism to get food. And we're going to say primary consumers are the ones that eat the producers. So these tend to be our herbivores and also our omnivores. So omnivores kind of go back and forth with the different kinds of consumers that they are in the trophic pyramid because omnivores eat both plants and animals. But primary consumers, these are the ones that eat the plants. So they get energy from the plant, but they don't get all of the energy that the plant got from the sun. We're looking at only 10%. This is our 10% rule. They only get 10% of that energy from the sun. So a lot of primary consumers have to eat a lot of producers. Like any grazing animal, like a horse or a cow, they eat a lot of producers every day because they only get 10% from each one from the sun, and they need a lot of energy to live. So again, cows are a good example, and horses. Squirrels are a small example. I always spell squirrel wrong. Squirrel. That's not right. That's okay. So herbivores are another word for primary consumer. They're the first consumer of the producers, and energy is going this way. If we keep sending energy upwards, we now have our secondary consumer. I'm going to abbreviate consumer. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. So, for example, something that might eat a squirrel, maybe a fox. They go after the squirrel babies. So the fox is the next consumer. They typically eat the primary consumers. If we did another little food chain here, we could say the algae in the water is eaten by a fish, which then gets eaten by a bear. So a bear can be a secondary consumer. But a bear is an omnivore, so a bear is one of those tricky ones that you need to decide depending on the food chain where they fit, because if a bear's eating a blueberry off a blueberry bush, it becomes a primary consumer. People can bounce back and forth between primary consumers and secondary consumers because I hope everybody eats vegetables, so you're a primary consumer when you eat fruits and vegetables, but then you become a secondary consumer when you eat things like fish and chicken or cows, steak. The next level up in our trophic pyramid is going to be our tertiary consumer, TERTIARY, consumer. These tend to be our predators, those that prey on other animals. They tend to be tops of the food chain. So in the one we've got going now, it's tough. Not a lot of things eat fox, but things like snakes will prey on small mammals. Things like, if we looked at an African ecosystem, things like lions might be up there. They are only eating meat. These are not our omnivores. These are our carnivores. And I forgot to mention over here with our 10% rule, producers get 100% of the energy from the sun, primary consumers get 10%, secondary consumers only get 1%. Notice how we've dropped another 10%, which means tertiary consumers only get 0.1% of that energy from the sun. So as the energy gets passed along, tertiary consumers consume secondary consumers. Secondary consumers only got 1% of that energy. So as the energy keeps flowing, they get less and less. These tertiary consumers get 1/10 of the energy from the sun. So they need to eat a lot as well. Finally, this top one, which doesn't always fit in every food chain, but if we were to continue and there was a 5th organism in the food chain, we would move up to something called our quaternary consumer. These are your real tops of the food chain. These are things like in an ocean ecosystem, maybe an orca would be considered this because they'll prey on a lot of different marine species. Hawks in our forest ecosystem eat a lot of things here. So again, they get even less energy from the sun, just 1/100%. So they're hunting often. Not every food chain has to have a quaternary consumer. Many times it stops right here at tertiary, but most food chains consist of these first 4 organisms. And remember the 10% rule. Producers get all of the energy from the sun and then they pass on 10%. Those primary consumers pass on 10% of what they got, so they only get 1% of the secondary consumers get 1% of the energy from the sun. And that 10% rule continues all the way up. What I'd like you to do today is I've created a Google drawing of the pyramid, but it's blank inside. I would like you to pick a type of ecosystem. So for example, you could pick a Arctic marine ecosystem. You could pick a rainforest ecosystem. You could pick a deciduous forest ecosystem like the one that we live in. You could pick a desert. Research different types and choose one that you think is really interesting. And I want you to take some time to really think about which one you like, because I'm going to ask you to use it a couple of different ways in the coming lessons. So today, you're going to choose an ecosystem that you like, and you're going to research the organisms within that ecosystem. And on that Google drawing I made, I want you to post pictures that you find on the internet of the producers in that ecosystem. So for example, if I chose deciduous forest, like what we live in here in New Hampshire, I would put a picture of a pine tree. And I can find that picture on the internet and post it in there. And then I'd look for primary consumers. Then I'd look for secondary consumers. I'm going to research my ecosystem and look for those websites that will tell me the different kinds of consumers in that ecosystem, find images of those animals or plants, and plug them into the level that they belong in. I've created a template of the Google Doc for you. All you need to do is open it in the Google Classroom and then add your information in. If you have questions, email me. Otherwise, enjoy this activity. Hopefully you took these down in your notes, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Care about you guys.